A very good evening to our students, parents, and fellow educators. I would like to welcome you to our SISB curriculum virtual event. I'm Principal Harold Lee from the PU Primary Section, and today I'll be hosting this event today. Before we begin, I would like to remind you that this is actually the second event in a series of virtual events that we're hosting, and later on, I will talk to you about the next upcoming event in the end of the month this evening. Next, please. Today, we have 4 speakers with us, and the topic for today is understanding Singapore's English, math, and science. Starting from the left, I would like to introduce to you the Assistant Principal of PU Primary, Mr. Chris Bacon. Second, we have the Assistant Principal for the Primary Section, Ms. Esther Nip. Next, we have the Head of Math Department, Ms. Kristen Ng Kelly. And then for the 4th speaker, we have a very special guest with us today. It is our honor today to have with us Dr. Ng Kok Min. Dr. Ng will be sharing with us today about Singapore's English, mathematics, and science curriculum. He has written numerous books and publications and has been actively involved in the development of education in Singapore as well as internationally. He is a very passionate educator with a doctorate in mathematics. We look forward to learning from Dr. Ng this evening. Dr. Ng, please.
Thank you, Principal Harold, for the very kind introduction. Good evening to all students, parents, fellow educators. My name is Kok Min, so it's my pleasure to be here today. I really like Thailand. I really Thailand for many things. For the food is so nice, the people are so nice, the view is so nice, and so on. So hopefully everyone is okay, and hopefully everyone will actually be healthy and well. And let's hope that this pandemic is over soon and I can be there in Thailand. Okay, just a little bit about myself. Next slide, please. My name is Kok Min, once again. So I was a math and science teacher teaching in Singapore schools. I started teaching in 2012. I was very fortunate the chance to be involved in authoring math textbooks used in schools in Singapore and other Southeast Asia countries. In fact, this started in the latest syllabus published by Ministry of Education Singapore. So I was roped in to actually finalize the curriculum together as well as produce textbooks for the country to use. And I'm very pleased that actually other countries also take interest in the books that we publish and they adopted our books as well. I also developed books with other ministries of education from UK, from US. So I'm very fortunate to have such experience. I also conduct training workshops and sharings for teachers in the region. So the exchange of ideas has been very beneficial for me to actually have a more bird's eye view of how the different countries compare in terms of their perspective of education and what are their needs that we can actually better meet in the countries. Next slide, please. This is an outline of what I'm going to share today. I will start off with a brief history of Singapore education system. As you know, Singapore is a very young country. We only gained independence in 1965. So we started off having different focuses, and later on you will see that we actually developed our education system very much focusing on the country needs, because after all, human capital is a very important resources for us. And nowadays we see that Singapore actually tops the ranking in international studies for math and science. Actually, later you will see that we actually started in the late 70s and early 80s. Then I'll move on to the subject frameworks for English, math, and science. I will show you about the aims and guiding principles of different subjects. And finally, I'm going to just share some teaching and learning approaches that we use in Singapore schools. Next slide, please. So this is the overview of the Singapore education over the years. So you can see that there are different focuses in 1960s, in 1970s, and so on. I'm not going to go through all of them. I just want to point to the 1970s part. So in 1970s, we have the efficiency-driven phase, whereby you can see that at 1978, we have that term called rigid education system. So back then, our education was very rigid, and this led to a very high dropout rate in our schools. We have very low literacy levels. In fact, there were studies comparing our education system, and it was found that we actually lag behind other countries in terms of the education that we produce by 1 or 2 years. So for example, for math, we actually lag behind by 2 years compared to the other countries. Since then, we actually revamped the education system. So next, I will point to 1990s. 1990s, the second point, curriculum content was cut by 30%. So the curriculum content was less, and which placed a lot of focuses on teacher training, because teachers receive at least 100 hours of training a year. So it was then that we focused a lot of quality teaching rather than the quantity. So by that shift, it actually led us to really shoot up the ranking. So when the first international study came out in 1995, Singapore came out among the top, and since then, we have always been in the top 3. Not because Singapore have just very smart students. It's not that. It's more of the emphasis that we place in education and a lot of trial and error along the years. Next, I would just point you all to 2010 and beyond. So we can see that the banding of secondary school spread. So we no longer band secondary school according to good schools or bad schools, because we believe that every school is a good school. It was then that we realized that academic results, the exam results are not everything. It's also about the learning. So we actually place a lot of focus on learning experiences and so on. And we are very fortunate, because even with this shift in focus, Singapore remains near the top of the ranking in terms of the international studies. Okay, next slide, please. So before going to the bulk of the content, I'll just share a common question that students always ask the teacher. So this is an example of the question that we get. So they will ask, teacher, why are we learning Pythagoras theorem? So this is an example. So it's not an easy question to answer actually, because sometimes teachers may think that, oh, because that next time you may be an engineer may actually need to apply Pythagoras theorem and so on. But let's be frank, actually a lot of us don't become engineer. A lot of us don't use Pythagoras theorem in our daily life. So this kind of theorem, which I will classify under content, is just a part of the syllabus, because there's actually more to the syllabus. So this really prompts us to really look deeper at what the syllabus does, and actually why are we learning all these things for? Next slide, please. So our subject frameworks. So these are the different things that are in our subject frameworks. We have the syllabus content, of course. So for example, things like counting forward from 1 to 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Counting backwards from 10 to 1, 10, 9, 8, and so on. So this is what we call the subject content, the syllabus content. But this is just a small part of it, because there are other parts of it that are very important. So in our subject framework, we do have the aim and guiding principles of the subject, because it's also important for us to know, like what I said about the Pythagoras theorem earlier, to know what else is there that we can teach the students other than just the content itself. Because in Singapore, we always have this saying that when people ask us, what do you teach? You cannot say, I teach math and science. We don't say that. We must say that I teach student, because fundamentally, we are teaching students. It's just math and science are the subjects that we teach, that we use to teach them. And in our frameworks, you can actually see that there's a very clear link to development of 21st century competencies, because we do see academic subjects as vehicles to teach life skills like perseverance, critical thinking, application, and so on, and also character values that I'm going to share later. And it's also about preparing students for a VUCA world. VUCA world is something that educators use to mean volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Because just imagine, the students that we are teaching today, they will retire in 2070. We don't even know what's going to happen in the next 5 years, much less to say 2070. So what we are teaching is the skill that we can equip with them so that they can handle the challenges ahead. Because I believe that fundamentally, we do well in the international study, not because that teachers go to school every day thinking that, oh, I want my student to do well internationally, every day repeating themselves. No, I don't think that's the case. Instead, I think that teachers really focus a lot on actually equipping students on this kind of skills. And that is just a affirmation at the end that tells us that what we are doing is something that is right. Okay, next slide, please. I'll start off with the math framework. So there are two parts to this slide. On the left, there are some points, and on the right, there's this chart that we use to represent or to summarize the things that we have in the math framework. But let me just go over to the left first. So in the math framework, we focus a lot on laying strong foundation for math. Because after all, we are not just teaching students for P1, not just teaching for students P2 and so on. So we have a broad eye view of what this particular concept is useful for the entire journey ahead of for the students. So this is a small part. So I would say that this part is part of the pentagon under the concept part at the bottom. So we have the numerical, algebraic, geometrical, statistical, probabilistic, analytical part. So this is the concept part whereby we want to lay strong foundation. But notice that this is just one of the 5 parts that we have, because that brings me to the second point, which is we want to develop logical reasoning and mental skills in students. So this includes things like can they actually apply things that they have learned to new problems? Can they actually think out of the box to come up with a creative method that is different from the standard method that we use, and so on? The third point is also about developing attitudes such as perseverance and confidence, because math is a subject whereby you need students to make mistakes. You need students to actually make mistakes, learn from one another, and so on. So it's about actually creating that productive struggle that we allow students to fail at times, but yet in a very secure and non-threatening environment so that they can develop perseverance and confidence along the way. And last but not least, the most important thing of all is the problem solving. Okay, problem solving is at the heart of our framework because we believe that mathematics is a very, very useful vehicle to teach problem solving. We don't focus a lot on rote memorization, so we don't get students to memorize a lot of things, but instead, we focus a lot on problem solving, whereby we want students to apply what they have learned to new situation. So this is the math framework. Okay, next slide, please. Some approaches that we use. So I'll start off with the first one. We call it the concrete pictorial abstract. In short, the CPA approach. So this is something that is synonymous with Singapore's math. So if you talk to other educators about Singapore math, they may tell you that it's CPA. So what is CPA? So CPA is an approach that we use to actually transit students from unfamiliar to familiar in a very systematic way. So we start off by letting students have some hands-on using concrete manipulatives. After that, we transit to the pictorial part, whereby we use things like models to help them see the relationship between concrete and then the picture. And lastly, moving on to the more abstract part. So this very systematic way actually helps us to bring on board as many students as possible, because different students, they have different learning styles. Some students, they are actually more active, they will like hands-on. So these kind of things will actually bring them on board rather than leave them behind. Second approach is the guided discovery approach. So on the right, you can see the example whereby we actually use a very specific triangle and show them that by shifting a rectangle and then derive a formula to find this area here. So guided discovery approach is something that is very mathematician, because students actually go through the fun of discovering something rather than just the teacher telling them the formula to use. Because when we involve students in this process, actually they gain a deeper understanding of the materials that they are learning, which is what we really place a lot of emphasis on. The last point, teaching of problem solving. So problem solving, like I said earlier, is a very important focus for us. But we don't just let teacher actually go through problem solving with students just like that, and students just receive them passively. Okay, it's not. So we have very explicit strategy to teach students how to approach a problem, how to unpack a problem, to understand them, how to devise a plan, and so on. So this is something that we place a lot of emphasis on. Okay, next slide, please. Next, I'll move on to the science framework. So science framework, we have to balance different aspects beyond content. So again, on the chart on the right is a summary of what we have for the science framework. So we can see that we have the 3 triangles, we have the knowledge, understanding, and application part. So these are all the science concepts that students learn. These are all the science concepts students learn. But this is just one of the 3 triangles that we have, because we also place a lot of emphasis on skills and processes and ethics and attitudes. Science as an inquiry is right in the middle, because we believe that science is a very important vehicle, because like math is a very important vehicle for problem solving. We believe that science is a very important vehicle to teach students how to identify problems, to how to actually ask questions about things that are happening around us. Last point, scientific literacy. We want to teach students skills whereby they can use scientific knowledge and method to identify questions and draw conclusions. Okay, next slide, please. So some approaches that we use the inquiry-based approach. So we actually vary the degree of responsibility students have in posing and responding to questions, designing investigation, and so on. So what I mean by this is that there are different kinds. So for example, there's the teacher-led inquiry and student-led inquiry. So we would actually judge based on the kind of task that we have and decide what kind of approach is best for students to actually have this experience in this inquiry-based approach. Like what I mentioned earlier, we actually teach how to actually identify a problem, because like there's this talk by Daniel Ping that says that today it's not just about problem solving. A lot of things we actually go to problem identifying, because there are so many information out there. It's about knowing how to identify the gaps in the market, how to identify gaps in our daily lifestyles, and how to improve them. So I think science actually is a very useful. What range of strategies that we use? We have investigation, questioning, field trip demonstration, concept cartoon, etc. So all these are specially selected hands-on and minds-on activities, because again, we actually place a lot of emphasis on involving students either by just using their hands and definitely using their minds throughout the activity as well. Okay, so that's the science teaching and learning approach. Next slide, please. Okay, here we have the English framework. Okay, font is a bit small, but I will actually unpack them in the next few slides. But I just want you to focus on the right in the middle. We have the part whereby we say strong foundation and rich languages for all. Because for Singapore, our first language is English, but actually a lot of us in our families, we don't speak English. For myself, I speak Chinese at home. So in the classroom, our teachers actually have to address a very large range of abilities in English language. But I'm pleased to say that I think we have done very well in this aspect. So it's about actually building strong foundation in us. So I'm going to unpack what this framework is in the next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is our English framework unpack. So we have 3 parts to it. The first part is about empathetic communicators. This is a very big word to use, because there are 2 parts to it. We have the part about communicators, because of course, language is about communication. But there's also this essence of being empathetic, having the empathy, because language, or English language in particular, is something that we believe can actually teach values. So we actually teach values about real world events, even things like character values. All these things we actually use to teach using English itself. Second part, we have the discerning readers. So nowadays, there are so much information online, offline, and a lot of them, they may not be so credible. So we want to actually teach our readers, our students to have that ability to be discerning, to know which are the ones that are reliable and so on. And the third part is the part about creative inquirers. So again, a lot of information, but the tough thing is actually to know how to synthesize the information, to know how to chain them out in a smooth way and present their argument in a very compelling manner. Okay, next slide, please. So these are some aims. So of course, the basic things would be to actually listen to, read, view critically with accuracy and so on. To use standard English that is grammatical, fluent, intelligible, and so on. Third, use standard English grammar accurately, appropriately, and so on. But the last point is something that is very important, very short, but very impactful, which is to use English with impact, effect, and effect. So I heard before this phrase that it's not about the loudness of your voice, it's about the loudness of your words. So I think language is very important in this sense, and English being a very global language, so to be able to use English with impact is extremely important. That's something that we try to inculcate in our students. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, these are some principles that we have. I won't go through all of them, but I just want to point you to the second part, second point about learner-centeredness. So we actually focus a lot on giving students the chance to speak, because language is a thing that you need to involve the students very actively. It's not that they can just read and just listen and they learn everything. They have to speak. They have to be involved in the learning process. The first point, contextualization. So we use a lot of things like songs, rhymes, even interesting things like K-pop news, all these things to actually teach grammar in a very fun way, in a very contextualized way to engage the students. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, just to sum up, I think to sum up about the fundamentals of the frameworks and approaches, some of my personal insights are as follow. We really want to make learning accessible to every student. So we call this the low floor, high ceiling approach, whereby every student can come on board. We don't want to leave students behind, because Singapore is a very small country. Human capital is very important to us. We really want to actually have an education that can bring the average high, whereby we have every student performing at a certain level. At the same time, we want to have a high ceiling, which means that we want to stretch the students who are actually capable to their limits. And like I said earlier, we need to have a broad eye view. So in Singapore, we build strong foundation, because we know that these concepts, they will actually be very useful in the next stage. These skills, they will be needed in middle school and so on. We also create opportunities for productive struggles to develop subject mastery. So to have deep understanding, to have deep subject mastery, it's important that we create some opportunities for students to very non-threatening ways through this, that they get stretched to higher level. The last point is very important to me, because in Singapore, we really believe that we are not just teaching academic content to students, but we also want them to know these too. We want them to know how to learn, because information is aplenty online. So the next kind of generation, they have all things out there, but it's about them knowing how to learn using those information and how to actually use them for greater use, and loving to learn, to have that passion for learning, to continuously grow and stretch themselves. So this is the part about my personal insight for fundamentals of the frameworks. With that, I come to the end. Thank you for your time. Principal Harold, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ng. Not to worry, we are not letting him go just yet. Dr. Ng will be staying with us this evening. Okay, and he'll be taking some of your questions at the end of today's session. Okay, so if you have any questions, anytime, you can feel free to type them into the chat bar. Okay, and we'll try to answer them later. Okay, now that you have heard from Dr. Ng about the overview of Singapore math, English, and science, next, we will talk about how SISB then uses this curriculum in our primary school. Next, I would like to invite our next speaker, Assistant Principal Chris Bacon. Chris will be sharing about the English curriculum in SISB. Chris, please.
Thank you very much, Harrow. Thank you, Dr. Ng, and good evening, everyone. And yes, I'll be talking about the English curriculum and how we use the Singaporean English curriculum here at SISB. Next slide, please. So with our English language, every lesson starts with a vision and a mission. And the vision is that every student is going to be an effective communicator and critical thinker. And with the mission, I like to focus on a few words. We want to focus on authentic learning, varied activities which are fun and meaningful. Okay, so that's where we're coming from with the English language teaching that we do at SISB. Next slide, please. So this evening, I'll touch on 3 areas, Stella in lower primary, Stella in upper primary, and also our English learning support program, which is also called ELS. Next slide, please. Okay, so Stella stands for Strategies for English Language Learning and Reading. And we can break it down into these 4 steps. We go through a rolling process where there's units which contain these 4 steps. Okay, so there's a shared book approach, there's language items and structures and skills, a modified learning experience, and writing tasks. And as we go through the year, there's a pattern that rolls over from unit to unit. So what I want to do is, rather than just looking at the words, let's see what that actually means in practice. Next slide, please. Okay, so each unit starts with a shared book. And that is where the teacher will read a book with the students, and the students will try and make predictions. They'll identify parts of language. They might spot new vocabulary, but they're guided by the teacher to explore that language first of all. And then they might break into smaller groups and read the book on their own or in small groups. Once that's finished, the teacher will spend some lessons explicitly teaching language items, structures, and skills. So that might be phonics, it might be grammar items, or again, parts of language. And all of these items are pulled from the book which they read at the start of the unit. So they're seeing really where this language comes from in a book, in real life. Okay, so it kind of connects well with the first part of the unit. Next slide, please. Okay, after they've done a few lessons of teaching about different language items, they'll come to this shared learning experience. And at SISB, that will be hands-on learning from a project kind of base. So in these pictures, the first child in orange is making an animal out of clay that he's imagined and started writing about. In the second picture, that child has made a rocket. They were studying about vehicles, and then the challenge was to make a rocket out of recycled materials. And the reason we do that is, again, we've looked at a book, we've learned language items from the book, and now we use that language in real life, hands-on. Okay, so we can start to say, here are the wheels, this is how the rocket flies. All these words they just learned from the book, they now put into practice in real life. Each unit normally ends with some kind of writing challenge, and that is normally some kind of creative writing. And we do it in a very, again, it's a very fixed pattern, but it really helps structure the writing for the students. They start by writing a story all together as a class. So the teacher with every student in the class will come up with some kind of story and they'll write it at the front. After that, we'll use a smaller group, maybe 4 or 5 children, and they will write a similar story or a similar report again, but this time less students. And that builds up really well to help the individual child write on their own. So we kind of scaffold, we build up towards the moment when they can write on their own, and that gives them the best chance possible to write creatively, fluently, and make a really good story. So those are the 4 steps that we go through with the Stella program, which kind of rotates as we go unit to unit. Next slide, please. Once we move into upper primary, which is primary 4 to 6, it follows a similar pattern. It grows up a little bit. The kids are older now, so we might have guided reading where they'll learn from a variety of texts. So it won't just be a reading book anymore. It might be websites or it might be news articles. So they'll use a greater variety of reading texts. There'll still be teaching of language features as there would be in lower primary, and the writing process is similar too, where they're planning, writing, reviewing, and editing their creative writing. In upper primary, as with lower primary, we start to look at speaking skills, so conversation skills, expressing opinions, speaking with clarity, all of those things we continue on, like I said, in a slightly more mature way in upper primary. Next slide, please. So the key skills really that we're aiming for after 6 years is something along these lines, where students can present their ideas and their projects with confidence fluently. And I love what Dr. Ng said earlier, where they present with impact. And that's not shouting, but it's where their words really take on meaning. That's a perfect explanation of what we're trying to achieve. We hope they can converse fluently and, really explain their opinions to their friends and teachers very well. We hope they can write very well as well. They've had plenty of practice by the time they come to the end of P6. And we also, as a lot of our activities are based in books initially, we hope they've got a passion for reading by the end of primary. And we hope that they haven't just got a small selection or a small interest area for reading, but they've got a wide interest for reading from different areas. Next slide, please. Okay, so we also have students who come into SISB and their language is not quite at the level of those who have been at SISB for a long time. And so they join our English language support program, and that's where we're trying to build up these students whose English isn't quite as strong as their peers. And the way we do this is really in three ways. The first way is we try and start where they are at. So we've got different levels of ELS, and we try and start the student at the right level for them, whether they're coming from a Thai school or a Chinese school or, I don't know, any other kind of international school where the English isn't quite there yet. We start at their level and try and build them up. And ELS is always conducted in small groups. So it's a much smaller setting where the teacher can be much more practical and hands-on with these students that need a little bit of extra support. And the aim of ELS is not to keep the student in ELS forever. The aim of ELS is to really start to move the student up so they can rejoin the mainstream class or start studying with their friends. Okay, so it's really a booster program to try and get them up to speed so they can join their friends in English classes for the rest of their time in the primary school. Next slide, please. Okay, so yeah, there's a clear pathway in the English learning at SISB. A strong foundation is what we're aiming for in the P1 to 3 year groups, building on that to really build up their core skills of presentation, speaking, reading and writing in P4 to P6. And as they come to the end of their time with us, in P6, they've got the option to take the IPSLE exam. And that's really to benchmark, to see where they're at with their learning that they've done over the last 6 years. And that's an international exam that is taken all over the world from Singapore. And we also encourage our students then to progress onto our SISB 6th form. And we hope that by P6, they've got all the skills necessary to make that step up to the next step in their learning journey. Okay, that's all I've got for you this evening. So thank you very much, Principal Harrow. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Now we are we're seeing some questions coming in, so keep them coming. We'll try to answer them later during the Q&A session. Next topic, we will talk about the Singapore math. Okay, how do our SISB students cope with such a rigorous and demanding curriculum and yet do well at the same time? To answer that, we have HOD Miss Kristen Ng Kelly. Kristen, please.
Thank you, Principal Harrow. Hi, everyone. I'm Teacher Kristen. I'm the head of the PU Primary Mathematics Department. Today, I'm going to share with you a little bit about the teaching approaches our teachers here at SISB use to deliver the Singapore Maths curriculum in our daily lessons. Next slide, please. So here at SISB, our aim is to make sure that students have fun learning maths, and in doing so, it will build their confidence in solving maths problems and hopefully foster a lifelong interest in mathematics learning. Next slide, please. So what do? Our maths teachers actually will enhance students' understanding of the mathematical concepts through the very unique CPA approach, which was mentioned by Dr. Ng earlier. So you can see in the pictures here, our lower primary students are actually using multi-link cubes to develop their understanding of the concepts of number bonds. And we also do incorporate a lot of interactive activities using our smartboard in the classrooms. Next slide, please. Now, by linking these mathematical concepts taught we hope that they will be able to use these skills in everyday use. So for example, you can see some of our students here, they are actually being challenged with a question. Is it true that the same number of each color of M&Ms is in every packet sold? And then they will apply their concepts of ratio and proportion to answer this question. Is it true? Is it really true? And to present their work, they would use pie charts and graphs. Next slide, please. So eventually, we hope to develop that students' critical thinking skills through a mathematical approach to problem solving. So you can see our students here using a variety of tools to solve geometry and measurement problems. Next slide, please. So as mentioned by Dr. Ng earlier, we hope that students know how to learn. So we also want to build up their confidence, foster an interest in mathematics, and most importantly, we hope through the use of group activities and peer assessment, students will enjoy our maths lesson and not be so scared by the vigorous curriculum that's being implemented. Next slide, please. Now, I'm going to explain a little bit on how we actually use the CPA, this very unique Singaporean CPA approach in our daily lessons. So you can see we use a lot of physical manipulatives like multi-link cubes, base 10 units, fraction disc, and so on in a variety of activities. Now, this is good for our younger learners because being able to use hands-on activities with concrete materials, it enables them to retain the understanding of concepts better. This is especially true for much younger learners like students in P1 and P2. Next slide, please. After the students have built up a strong foundation in the mathematical concepts, we then guide them to develop the use of pictorial diagrams and models in problem solving. This is known as the pictorial learning approach, and our maths teachers also promote peer learning. As you can see, a lot of group work is being implemented in our lessons. Here, the students are actually learning more about fractions, equivalent fractions. Next slide, please. Lastly, we also want students to be able to explain how they get the answer. Maths is not just about a final answer. It's important for us that students are able how they derive at the final answer because it shows us their understanding of the concepts. And so we link it with many detailed and clear and concise working that we practice in our daily work. You can see the students working together and individually here. Next slide, please. Lastly, it's not just about learning in books, right? So we hope that students will develop a whole new world of mathematics learning. So SISB students are often encouraged to participate in various maths Olympiad competitions. And you can see here that some of our students have achieved quite outstanding achievements in the past few years. In 2019, SISB was also awarded the top school in Thailand in ISMC. Next slide, please. Lastly, to summarize here, what we do is mainly at a younger level in P1 and P2, we will help them to develop a strong foundation in their concepts, and then we will guide them to use these concepts in a variety of tasks and assessments in P3 to P6. Finally, most of our students will be encouraged to take this benchmark examination known as the International Primary School Leading Examination by SEAB in Singapore. Thank you very much. I hope this clears up any doubts and I hope you understand a little bit more. Thank you for listening. I'll give back to Harold. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kristen. Now we have one last speaker for today before we go into the Q&A session. And this speaker is Assistant Principal Esther. She will share with you about her passion for science and how SISB sparks the love of science using the Singapore curriculum. Esther, all yours.
Thank you, Principal Harold. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I am AP Esther, and allow me to share with you how our SISB students learn science in primary school. Next slide, please. Okay, so before we start, allow me to share with you this belief that science teachers have in teaching science. I would like you to focus on the word teaching through inquiry, and that inquiry is the engine for student-driven learning. Now, with this in mind, okay, science lessons in SISB are always exploratory in nature to allow students to explore nature and things around them as freely as possible. In P1 and 2, as you can see in the picture there, this is actually a science lesson held in our butterfly garden, where we actually spend a lot of resources to create a sustainable butterfly garden where students can always come and observe nature at its best. Next slide, please. So for P1 and P2 science lessons, students are often taken out of the classroom to explore, to play games, to actually learn process skills such as communicating, classifying, and observing. In one of the pictures here, the students are actually in the classroom. They're actually playing with a shoe box that we use. Okay, in there we place an object. So it's actually very dark, and we will ask our students, can you see anything inside? And they will definitely tell you no. And then when you give them a torchlight and you get them to shine it through, then they will realize that, oh, I actually need light to see. You know, these are actually very simple science concepts that we want our students to understand through exploring and investigating on their own. Next slide, please. So for P3 and 4 science lessons, you can actually observe that more science lessons are actually held in the science lab, okay, where students actually start to investigate, to predict the experiment before even starting, and then to actually evaluate whether their prediction, does it match what they actually thought at first. And when it does not match, that's where we have a lot of things to discuss and learn more. Okay, so next slide, please. In P5 and 6, science topics are actually a lot more abstract, a lot more advanced. So you can also see from the pictures that the science equipment used are also a lot more sophisticated. Okay, in one of the pictures, a student is actually using a data logger to track the temperature of melting ice. This is actually a very classic example of maths and science is being integrated, because there is actually a graph created by the data logger. So you actually, in primary school science, you actually need mathematics skills to draw conclusion and to understand the results of your experiments. Okay, next slide, please. So the other thing that is one of the key ingredients of scientific discovery and also scientific advancement is imagination and creativity. And for this reason alone, Science Makers Club is born. It is created to serve as a platform for our students to just build, to create, to imagine, to be resourceful, and then to also test out their design, their products. Okay, so next slide, please. And then to add in some spice and challenge to our little ones. So this year, we actually got them to create their own video to showcase what is their favorite animal, or what is the most exotic plant that they have seen, or rather, what is the most unique animal that you couldn't really categorize them in any groups of animals. So actually, the aim of this challenge is to also motivate them to learn out of their textbook, to actually explore and research more. Next, please. And so this is a work in progress. Our students are also participating in the science drama competition this year. And this is where students try to use drama to explain science concept learned, to explain scientific processes. Okay, so this is where they also learn how to direct. Actually, students create their own script here. They direct how they want their classmate to act, and they also edit their own videos. So this is a work in progress, and we will definitely share with you the videos when they are done. Next slide, please. So here, the science pathway for SISB students is very similar to English and maths. So for P1 and 2, our little ones would have their own portfolio that is created through hands-on activities. And then they also have, and for P3 to 6 students, they have performance tasks, they have group activities, and also formative assessment in the form of bite-sized tests, topical tests. It's really simple. We just want to know what they have learned at the end of each topic. And then there's also the option at primary 6 to take the IPSLE exam at the end of P6. Okay, so I think this is the last slide for me. And back to you, Principal Harold. Thank you everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you very much, Esther. And now we have come to the last part. Okay, that's the question and answer session. Okay, we have several questions that have come in and some of the questions are similar. So I will try to group them together and I will try to distribute them to all the speakers so that nobody feels left out, okay? Okay, the first question I think goes to Dr. Ng. This is quite a popular question. Okay, how does Singapore Math and Science differ from UK and US curricula? Okay, so how does Singapore Math and Science, okay, how is it different from the UK and American curriculum? Dr. Ng, please.
Okay, thanks for the question. I will classify the main differences into two categories. So I would say the first category actually is on the emphasis of deep understanding that we place in Singapore Math and Science curriculum. Because I think if we look at the content itself, certain content is taught earlier in Singapore, certain content is taught earlier in, let's say, US and UK. So I think it will balance out eventually, but it's more of the emphasis that we place on deep understanding. Because we in Singapore educators, we actually base our understanding actually into two categories. We have the conceptual understanding, we also have the procedural understanding. Procedural understanding, of course, it means students knowing how to carry out a procedure. Step 1 is what, step 2 is what, and so on. But that's the other part, which is the conceptual understanding, which is whether students understand why this method actually works. I think we actually place a lot of emphasis on that in terms of how we structured our development, our curriculum, because like what we have shared earlier about CPA, about guided discovery. So all these approaches are very unique to Singapore. They actually build a lot of foundation skills in students so that they actually understand what they are doing and not just memorizing the methods. So that's number one. The other emphasis would be on the philosophy part, which is on problem solving and inquiry. Because let's say in assessment, or let's say when we are teaching in the daily classroom, we don't just teach at the surface. We actually place put a lot of effort and time in terms of developing students' competency in applying the concepts to new situations. Because we believe that it's through that, then we can really see whether students are capable of mastering that skill. So the problem-solving part, the inquiry part, they are very unique part of Singapore as well. So not just very surface learning. Maybe I just share. In fact, both US and UK, they actually have taken interest in Singapore education system as well. So for example, for US, they actually work with Singapore publishers to develop textbooks using Singapore approach to fit their curriculum. And same thing for UK. So UK, two major curriculum, we have the Oxford, we have the Cambridge. So both of them, they actually also have worked with local publishers also to actually develop textbooks. So yeah, so I think that sums up my point. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Ng. I think we can all agree that all curriculum, the objective is the same, the content is the same, okay, and the journey is the difference is the journey at which we reach that destination. Okay. Next, I have a question. This is, I think, from a parent. The question says, how is Singapore English curriculum suitable for Thai students? Okay, this question goes to Chris, please. Chris?
What a great question. And as you may know, I'm not Singaporean, but I have worked with Singaporeans for quite a while. And I think Dr. Ng touched on it earlier, that Singapore is a very multicultural country. And there's a range of nationality, there's a range of cultures there where English speaking might not be the language that they speak at home. Some people speak Malay, some people speak Chinese or Indian. And so I think that if we so the curriculum is made for accepting people whose first language or language at home might not be English. So bringing the Singapore curriculum to Thailand makes sense in that I think many Thai students English is not the language spoken at home also. And so it does make sense, and we see that students can get very strong using the Singapore curriculum because it's almost built for that kind of student, where English is not going to be the language that they practice all the time at home, but they practice in school. So I think it's very useful for a Thai student, and I think it's a very good fit with the Thai education. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. I didn't know you're not Singaporean. Okay, next question. Let me see. We have a question. I think this question goes back to Dr. Ng. What are the key benefits of Singapore Math and Science, and how do they benefit students progressing on to secondary schools? Okay, let me repeat the question. It's quite long. What are the key benefits of Singapore Math and Science, and how do they benefit students who are progressing on to the secondary school? Dr. Ng, please.
Thanks for the question. I think this actually allows me to build on to my earlier point about Singapore Math and Science, what's the unique part of it. So in terms of the approach that we use, the CPA, the guided discovery, and so on, they actually allow us to build very strong foundation in Math and Science in terms of the concepts. So because Math and Science, they are both subjects that are very spiral in nature. So what do we mean by spiral is that maybe, for example, in P1, they learn 1 to 10. Next, they will learn 11 to 20 in P2 and so on. So they actually revisit what they have learned earlier in terms of the skills and then building on top of that. So with the strong foundation, it actually allows them to be confident in displaying the skills that they acquired earlier without having to repeat the teaching again and again. So we spend a lot of time in terms of the CPA, to transit to abstract part. We actually have the students to actually use hands-on, to actually use pictures to get them familiar and so on. But this actually pays off eventually, because when they move on to the next stage of education, the strong foundation actually save time. So we spend more time at the start to save time eventually. So I think in terms of concept, strong foundation. The other part is something that is less tangible, but I think it's also something that is very true, which is building strong foundation in learning. Because in the way that the students learn in a Singapore Math and Science classroom, it's a very structured way. It's a very focused way whereby they acquire something. So they are actually familiar to this kind of learning style. So when they actually have this habit of learning, it's very useful for them, because when they go on to the next level, they can always fall back on the experiences that they had earlier and think, how can they actually make use of those experiences to adapt to the new concept. So it's always about making the unfamiliar familiar and making the familiar less familiar, so that it's challenging for them. Because we really go beyond rote memorization and applying learning. So when they go higher level, all these things will still come back to be put into good use. Last point, again, something less tangible but also very important, is the confidence and interest part. Because we always have that question, hey, you like math? Then I say, I like math. Oh, so you do well in math? So that brings me to the question of, do I like math because I do well in math, or do I do well in math, that's why I like math? So it's like a chicken and egg thing, but I think there's no definite answer to this. The main thing is, are the students able to actually enjoy small successes along the way? Do they actually feel that they are learning something? I think that's very important to actually make them like a subject or don't like a subject. So I think with the confidence that we actually try to build in students by having them learn very systematically and also having adequate checks to see whether they understand something or not, and for teachers to actually come in and intervene, all these actually build the confidence and interest in learning a subject. So even when they proceed to the higher level, maybe even beyond the secondary school, maybe even high school or university, they have the confidence, and that will actually do them well in put them in a good state. Okay. Thanks. Back to you, Principal Harold.
Thank you, Dr. Ng. Okay, we provide a very good, strong foundation in the curriculum. Okay, on top of that, we with a strong confidence as well. Okay, so that definitely will give our students a head start. Okay, in the sixth form school or in the secondary school. Okay, next question. I have a question about math. Okay, so Kristen, you're up next. Singapore math is very famous for being difficult and rigorous. Okay, so how does SISB approach the teaching of math in a primary school? Okay, Kristen, very popular question. Off to you.
Thank you, Principal Harold. Yeah, I believe this is a very common question. I think a lot of students and parents even find Singapore maths quite scary. Okay, so here at SISB, we aim to make it less scary for our students. So what we do is we do a lot of hands-on, interactive, meaningful learning through a varied activities, class discussions, and we even try to link a lot of the concepts to real life situations. So for example, in primary 3, they learn about time, duration, and also about the concepts of money. So we try to link that to a possible real life situation to enhance students' understanding of these concepts. So students are told to plan a travel itinerary. So if they were to go Singapore for a day holiday, with a given amount of budget, let's say a couple of hundred, 200 Singapore dollars, how would they plan out a plan for their parents to bring them on holiday? So we believe that if we can make the learning more meaningful, students will be more engaged in their learning and they will build confidence slowly, gradually, and they'll be more interested in maths, less scary that way. I hope this answers your questions. Thank you. Back to you, Principal Harold.
Okay, thank you very much, Kristen. I always believe that, yes, the core of Singapore math is problem solving. And when I still remember a long time ago when I went through the teacher training course, my lecturer told me that if we can solve it, then it is not a problem anymore. Okay, so I think the concept here is we want to build the resilience of our students, okay, and build that mindset, okay, that they will be brave and they will be ready to tackle problems hands-on and not be afraid of them. Okay, so that they can always apply these techniques to everything they do in life. So that's my personal take. Okay, next question. We have Esther, or else Esther will feel very left out. Okay, this is for science. Okay, so how does, I think it's a similar approach, similar question. How does SISB make science lesson enjoyable? Okay, even though it is a very tough curriculum. Esther, please.
Thank you, Principal Harold. Okay, the Singapore science may look really rigorous if you look at the way our questions are being set, but do know that science teachers actually spend a lot of time and effort to design lessons to actually create very meaningful tasks pre and post lesson, so as to ensure that our students have the process skills and the answering technique to answer questions. So there's a lot of resources that are being used to teach science on a daily basis. So that's where, as long as our students understand the concept well, because they really enjoy it and they really want to do well with this kind of positive motivation, they will always be able to do well for our science. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Esther. I get Esther's message. She's trying to tell me that science teachers work very hard. Okay, roger that. Thank you, Esther. Okay, let me see. We have a few more questions. We are running out of time. Let me see. The next question. Let's talk about, this is a very common question in today's climate with COVID. Okay, so this question I believe goes to Chris. After students have spent much time learning from home because of COVID, their English level has gone down. Okay, so how can students regain that level of English that they used to be at? Okay, Chris?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think what we see from students coming back after the home-based learning we've been doing, it's not always that their level has gone down, but it's that they're not spending as long speaking English as they would do if they were in school. So particularly true from our students whose family might be Thai or Chinese or another nationality. When they go home and they've been learning at home for a long time, they've missed that opportunity to practice English. Now, this isn't just English lessons. This is also, we learn a lot just through conversing, talking to other people. For example, talking to their friends in the playground, in the classroom. So the level might have gone down a little bit, but I think coming back to school, as we've seen the students starting to do now, it's interesting how quickly they drop back into chatting away in English and things like that. So I think that's the good thing about now school is starting to open up, that they've got that opportunity to not just study English through a screen, but be immersed in English in their day-to-day lives. So I think that's quite an interesting thing that we're seeing now and quite an exciting thing. So I hope that continues. And I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much, Haru.
Thank you, Chris. So the bottom line is we want all students to be back in school and learn on site with us, yeah? Okay. Okay, I believe we should have time for, can we squeeze in 2 more questions? Okay, this question is a math one for Kristen. Okay, Singapore math again. Singapore math is famous for being difficult. Okay, so what is taught in Singapore math? Is it relatable to real life settings?
Thank you, Principal Harold. Yes, of course, a lot of our concepts can be linked to real life setting, like we've seen in the presentation earlier on, right? Sometimes students will question certain things in life. And similar to what Dr. Ng's presentation was about the Pythagoras theorem, I do get the question a lot in class, especially from the upper primary students. You know, they ask like, am I going to use this in my life later on? And they do. We try to link all this maths concept that they've acquired. As I mentioned previously about the P3 task that we use with concepts of money and also with concept of time. Similarly, concept of ratio and proportion at P5 level, they also link in real life. For example, how to mix a fantastic drink using a variety of juices and stuff like that. So we are able to, and it does make the learning more authentic and it makes it more meaningful for the students as well. I hope this answers your questions. Back to you, Principal Harold.
Okay, thank you very much, Kristen. Okay, we have time for 1 more question. Okay, and I think let's give this last question to Dr. Ng. Okay, with his experience in international education. Okay, the question here is, okay, you have the Singapore curriculum in SISB. Okay, how can students who come in from a different curriculum, is it challenging for them to adapt to the Singapore curriculum? Okay, maybe I can repeat that again. Okay, so students who have been studying in another country or another system, another curriculum, okay, if they learn the Singapore curriculum, would it be very difficult for them and can they adapt? Okay, Dr. Ng, would you like to help?
Okay,
please?
sure. Okay, thanks for the question. So, okay, so I do hear a lot of questions regarding Singapore curriculum being very difficult. So I do agree to some extent. I would say it's rigorous, but at the same time, I would say I'll go back to the approach that I've mentioned earlier. Low floor, high ceiling, because in Singapore we have high average. So if you look at Singapore as a population, if you look at, let's say, the extreme cases of how many Nobel cases, Nobel winners that we have, Nobel Prize winners, we don't have any. So does it mean that we are not that good? I would say that Singapore has very high averages in all subjects. So everyone is performing to a certain standard, and actually that actually can be traced back to the approach that we use. About actually developing our concepts in a very structured way, leaving no student behind. So I would think that at the start, maybe it is the style that it has to take some accustoming to, but eventually, because of the approach that we use, every student will be able to do it without time, because of the hands-on, the minds-on things that we have to actually encompass all students to actually bring down the standard to the suitable level. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Ng. And that last question and answer will wrap up today's session. Can I have the next slide, please? So after hearing from the 4 speakers today, okay, I hope you have now a better understanding of the Singapore curriculum and how SISB approaches this curriculum. The next session, okay, will be a continuation of today's section actually. Okay, and this session looks into the differences between IB and A levels. Is one better than the other? Okay, which one should my child choose? Find your answers in the next session on the 31st of March. Till then, take care, stay well, and we'll see each other on the 31st. Good night and goodbye.